The Hobbesian view that hunter-gatherer life is nasty, brutish, and short comes from a cultural time when racism was prevalent of traditional peoples, and it is not applicable today, and we need a new view of our ancestors. Hello kindred longevity lifestyle designers, this is Zach here with secretsoflongevity.com. This is a long-awaited video, probably the one I've been looking forward to making most for this series on animal foods, and it's the effect that animal foods have on longevity. So specifically, we're going to be looking at examples of hunter-gatherers largely, and the proof that they and their diet that tended to be higher in animal foods in most situations actually help promote longevity in them and didn't detract from it, as is the common myth portrayed of the idea that hunter-gatherers live very short lives. But of course we're going to look at some other traditional cultural examples and some studies. So the major thing here is that there's the idea that hunter-gatherers live very short lives. So the first thing I have to say before getting into the references for this video is that if you disagree with anything I'm saying, by all means do comment. But you're not going to hear from me in a response unless you make a video response. So I'm encouraging people during this whole series to make video responses so that any input I put out there in terms of countering views is put out there in a way that other people are going to be able to see it, and it's the best use of my time. So if you're going to be wanting my response, definitely do that. But also take into consideration that any biased views that aren't based in science I'm not going to listen to, and also rhetoric and insults to myself or anyone commenting below on any of my videos, of course, is not taken to heart and will definitely be deleted and potentially might be blocked. So to keep that in mind when commenting, this is a place of rigorous logic and reason and science-based critiques, and I'm totally open to hearing alternative ideas. Always am. It just needs to be devoid of that emotional involvement that often gets people riled up and saying things in a way that is not respectful of others. Also, at any point during the video you can click this button in the top right hand corner of your screen, which will take you to sort of the table of contents page for all the videos in this series on the health benefits of animal foods. This whole video series is about dispelling the myths of eggs, meat, and dairy being harmful to the health, even in larger amounts. And so if you want to get at certain points that you don't see it in this video, I definitely recommend watching the other videos first before putting your response together, because it's probably answered, or your question's probably answered in some of those other videos, or your response. So as I was saying, the common myth that hunter-gatherers live very short lives is one that is perpetrated by most people. It's just assume that from either bad media portrayal, that could be anything from movies, ads on TV, documentaries where they try and portray hunter-gatherers and they take people and dress them up in shaggy clothing and have unkempt hair and they look miserable. And that's only people's personification of it from their imagination. There's no direct way of knowing how these people lived exactly. And because we live in such warm and safe environments today, with our walls and our heating and our refrigerators, it's hard for us to imagine that what people lived like out in the open, in the wild. It's hard to imagine that as being comfortable. It obviously wasn't comfortable in the way that we are familiar with comfortable being, but we can't automatically assume that it was a hard life, or that it was undesirable to live the way they were living. So the first link below, and as I go through all these links, there's no description with the links, so you just have to watch the video and get what I'm talking about, and then go to the number if you want to check what I'm saying. So that first link there is a PDF download, so you go to that link and you'll automatically get a PDF download of a study done on a large number of different tribes, 8 different hunter-gatherer tribes specifically, where they were looking at a number of factors to figure out the average lifespan, but sort of do it in a way where they were eliminating the problems of infant mortality. So the problem of infant and childhood mortality, even up to the age of 15, is a big problem in hunter-gatherer lifespan when determining it, because if you take a group in the wild where they have higher rates of infection, sudden deaths from accidents, and exposure and those types of things from just happens, a child happens to be born in at a bad time when there's a drought or there's bad weather going on and they get exposure and they die early. So there was a much higher rate of those deaths. So when we're trying to figure out if the lifestyle that hunter-gatherers were living was optimal, we can't take that into account because that is not something that we're currently experiencing in our lives. And modern medicine has had the pluses of reducing the death rates of infants and children, and that's a good thing. But in the grand scheme of things, we want to look at if we want to be looking at diet, we have to eliminate those deaths caused by non-lifestyle factors, or obviously non-lifestyle factors, and then work out the average lifespan from those who do happen to survive those things. And what we see is the average lifespan being around 74 for just these 8 groups. I can't get into the names of the 8 different tribes mentioned just because I can't remember them off the top of my head, and my computer doesn't work out here out in the outside. The internet connection doesn't work quite this far. So check out the second link below if you want to sort of have a understanding of that study, which was a post done by Mark Sisson, and that's link number 2. And the good thing about this is that he kind of breaks it down, because it is a long PDF. It's like 40-something pages, or 30, high 30s or 40s. And while I read through a bunch of it, I didn't get as good of a breakdown of it as I did when I started looking at Mark Sisson's post. And he kind of looks at the major factors you want to be looking at. And it makes very clear sense there when you look at that, again, these hunter-gatherer societies had diets that really supported long life. When you're out in the elements and all the time, and you have this exposure and susceptibility to bone breaks causing you to die because of exposure of the wound or infection, and you don't have the preventative care of modern medicine, which has its pluses, don't get me wrong, but the lifestyle of the hunter-gatherers were clearly much more improved compared to the lifestyles that most people live today. And that's when we're talking about diet, exercise, probably sleeping conditions even, being grounded all the time, less exposure to stressors from work. They work a lot less, maybe 17 hours a week to collect their food and do other things, and the rest of the time was luxury time, which would be spent doing work in the sense of making baskets and perhaps other things that were crafts or things that would contribute to making their life easier, but they weren't work in the sense that they were necessities. So the necessities of gathering their food and ensuring their livelihood took up a very small amount of their weekly time. So much so that people don't totally understand, or researchers don't understand, what possessed people to begin agricultural practices in the first place. So the dependence on the grains, the higher starches, and less animal foods, at least wild animal foods, and a lot more hybridized foods, began the degradation of our ancestors' health very quickly. And there was clearly a sudden drop in lifespan. The average lifespan at the start of the agricultural revolution was around late 30s, early 40s, and that's definitely been corroborated by the scientific evidence. However, we've made up for that with our advances in modern medicine. So what happens if you combine the advances of modern medicine with the lifestyle and diet, at least the ones that don't involve the exposure and the risk of infection, together? So you have a much more improved lifestyle combined with the potentially life-extending qualities of modern medicine. That's the idea I'm trying to get at with this video series, and a lot of my work in general, but in particular just this point, is that the hunter-gatherers were living long lives. They were not dying young and early. Link number 3 below is a study from a journal that was talking about the LDL and HDL levels of hunter-gatherers, the average levels. And it's said nowadays that the average, what people are trying to get as a target is around a level of 100 to 115 for LDL levels in the average individual, so bringing it down to that level. So that means people's LDL levels are very high, because the average hunter-gatherer, according to this study, was looking at anywhere from between 50 to 80. And that is a much healthier level, and anything below 80 is very much connected, or even anything below 60 is connected with longevity in the majority of studies on longevity around the world, looking at specifically at heart disease risk factors. What we know from my previous video done on cholesterol and saturated fats and sort of the biochemistry and physiology of disease in general, and you can find that link here. It's part of the same series. If you watch that one, it's over an hour long, but I get into some very good information. And I make it very clear that the biggest risk for heart disease isn't LDL, but actually VLDL. But a lot of the tests on LDL include the VLDL in there, so you can't really determine the difference between LDL and VLDL. You have to get a more specific test. And it's the VLDL that is responsible for getting stuck to and oxidizing and getting stuck in the arteries and causing plaque buildup. And this is definitely more connected to triglyceride levels, which is in turn connected to higher carbohydrate consumption. So LDL, while this study is showing that in hunter-gatherers it's low, it's not our biggest concern, but yes, it does show that even hunter-gatherers had this level quite low, and compared to most people, even on less animal foods, they have higher LDL. It's kind of ironic when animal foods are constantly being vilified as the worst thing that we could be consuming. So by the way, if you want to actually get the facts straight on what our ancestors' diet was, this is another video from this series, which is the diet of our ancestors. And it looks at the science behind really determining whether or not we have been primarily a plant-dominant based species or a meat and animal foods based dominant species. Of course, it's somewhere in between, but it actually is, over the course of our whole evolution, been leaning more heavily on the animal food side. And only more recently has it moved further towards higher plant foods. Hey, we'll get back to the main topic of this video in just one moment. I have to say that if you're a regular subscriber, perhaps you're just watching my videos on an intermittent basis, or maybe you just came across this one video this one time, but you're liking what I'm saying, in which case I definitely recommend hitting the subscribe button above. I would definitely appreciate any contribution you're able to make, whether it's through a phone consultation you set up with me, a donation directly to me, or purchasing products through the affiliate links I have listed on my site or below my videos. Specifically below this video, when you click the drop down box, I've got affiliates for a variety of companies I highly recommend and which I use the products from on a regular basis. You see me feature them in videos in the past. And yeah, if those suit your fancy, by all means look into them. Otherwise, there's, like I said, the other options there below the video as well. If you want to get to this page from somewhere other than YouTube, you click the little button in the bottom right hand corner there, has the YouTube logo, and it opens up a new tab in your browser where you can get to those links. So with that, we're going to get back to the video, and I wholeheartedly appreciate any contribution you're able to give to me. So whenever people bring up hunter-gatherers in the nutritional world, in terms of them living a long time, they always talk about the Inuit and the Maasai living very short lives. And to some extent the Maasai have lived short lives, but we can't just look at that one group and label all hunter-gatherer groups. These are two hunter-gatherer groups that happen to consume virtually 98 to 99% of their calories and their nutrition from animal foods. But specifically, to talk about the Maasai quickly, yes, they have absolutely no heart disease, even though it's said that they somehow do have it. I've heard people saying they have atherosclerosis when they, yes, they might have plaque buildup, but if they're not actually having the heart attacks, it's not having a big impact on their health. So they're actually dying from other things. That's what has them having such low death rates. But what people don't get is that these studies that show actually sort of consensus of the average lifespan of the Maasai even today is shown to be so low because today is not how the Maasai lived 50 to 100 years ago. With the encroachment upon their territory of industrialization and advancement in the world, the Maasai have had a lot of problems come up in their society, which has, one of the biggest being poverty, which has really stricken them hard and reduced their lifespan. It's quite obvious that financial affluence affects that, and the Maasai more and more are turning to foods that are high in carbohydrates, like the grains, beans, and other things they're getting from markets from nearby cities, because they don't have enough land to raise as much cattle anymore, or to get their meat, or to basically live the life they need to live. The other factor that is involved in Maasai lifespan is the high rates of syphilis. They happen to not be monogamous. They're actually polygamists in a way, or polyamorous, and the men have multiple wives. However, they are, or at least it's socially acceptable for them to have partners outside of marriage, and they end up sleeping with someone in the city or from outside, and they come back, and then their possible STDs or STIs get spread throughout their family, and that gets spread throughout everyone else. The biggest one being syphilis, and link number 4 below clearly shows that this is a major problem among the Maasai. So we cannot blame animal foods for their high rates of death at an earlier age than normal. Also, they have deaths from lions because of the hunts that they do, or the lions being attracted to the cattle and the farmers getting killed by lions. It's much higher than other tribes in Africa. There's the problem with AIDS, of course. There's the problem with the bad water or unhealthy or unsanitary water sources that they end up drinking from because of the problems with the environment there as time moves on. So I'm personally sick of hearing people saying, well, the Maasai live brutally short lives, and it's not a good example to look at them for health. They have robust health, they are very strong, they can jump very high, they're amazing hunters, being able to hunt lions, and they also have a propensity for violence amongst themselves, and there's a lot of, unfortunately, it's not that they're a warring tribe anymore, but they do have violence amongst each other and other outsiders who are trying to steal their cows. They have access to guns now, so there's a number of factors increasing the risk of death, and it's not animal foods. And when it comes to the Inuit, there's a lot of reference to them living very short lives, and it's true that today, and everything post the industrial diet having come into the Inuit life, they have one of the worst life expectancies in North America. There's the next 2 references below, numbers 5 and 6. Number 5 actually isn't a link, but number 6 is. But number 5, if you search that, if you copy and paste that reference to a book, if you search that, you'll find some of the things connected with that online. And you can see quite clearly that this study of the Greenlanders and other groups that would be considered Inuits that ate these very high meat diets are no longer eating those diets. These are post processed food diets becoming introduced with the white flour, etc. And these are simply not applicable to the traditional Inuit diet, and saying that that is somehow the cause of these low lifespans. Dr. Henry W. Grist, you can see his name here and you can type it in and do a search on him. I don't have any links for his work, but he lived for 17 years with the Inuit before the industrialization, or the commercial foods getting in, and high processed white flour and sugar getting into their diets. And he at least observed that the elders in the Inuit communities were living to very great ages. And again, this is speculative, this isn't a study, but it's really the most we have with the Inuit. We can see that people were observing long life, and if we can have the potential for long life, it's potential for anyone to have that long life. So, you know, we have to take these ideas of these cultures living very short lives with a grain of salt, because we don't have the evidence saying either way, really, but we do have the anecdotal evidence that they were living at one point much longer. The next series of links are all of famous Native American elders. Some were chiefs, some were just elders, even some were warriors, and they you can see quite clearly that even the Native Americans were able to live long lives in the supposed nasty, brutish, and short conditions that supposed hunter-gatherers had to live in. I've read some references saying that the Pilgrims and the Europeans that came over and that were first colonizing North America were amazed at the lifespan of the Native Americans and how robust and strong they were, despite the fact that they didn't eat grains or much at all, depending on which area they were invading. And a big factor of this was their herbal tradition, their high animal foods diet, and their lifestyle, which was much more active, obviously, than people trying to start farming and live off the land in a not so healthy way. So the first one is Chief Seattle, who lived to be 84 years old, And yeah, these aren't centenarians, but this list still shows that they weren't living to 40, 45, 50. They were living to past 80 in all these examples. So Chief Seattle was part of the Duwamish tribe. So actually the next link, so 7 is a link to the Wikipedia article on Chief Seattle if you want to check his lifespan. And then number 8 is to the page for the Duwamish tribe, and further down there it gives an example of their diet. And you can see an amazing assortment of really delicious looking foods: salmon, fiddleheads in the spring, berries at various times of the year, various grazing animal meats, deer, various types of game, and various types of herbs and greens, wild greens. And it's just an amazing assortment of foods that would fall under the paleo category. Some root vegetables were probably in there, but not a large amount of total calories coming from carbohydrates. This was probably in some cases, not specifically necessarily the Duwamish tribe, but certain native tribes would have been on a ketogenic diet even. Link number 91 is Blackhoof, and he lived to be 91. That's an incredible age for a hunter-gatherer, especially since they have that risk of injury causing infection or other problems that does prevent them from probably being centenarians on a higher level, or to a higher degree that we would tend to see in our society today. Link number 10 is Black Elk, and he lived to be 87. Link number 11 is Bukongahelas, and he lived to be 85. Link number 12 is Longhorn, and he lived to be 84. And link number 13 is of John Smoke Johnson, and he lived to be 94. That's an incredible age again. It was not that extraordinary to see these long-lived elders. They obviously still exist today, but natives are more and more infiltrated with unfortunate ravages of commercialized foods, and because of the poverty that strikes some of the reserves, it really has impacted them even more so than they would have been able to live had they been sticking to a very traditional diet. But more and more people are actually waking up and helping promote the traditional diets and helping these communities realize their traditional roots were healthy, not unhealthy, and promoted longevity. So often in the past, when I was pro higher plant food diet, I was talking about the majority or all of the long-lived cultures being plant-dominant diets or carbohydrate-dominant diets, and that simply was not overly the case that I'm now seeing. You know, you've got the Blue Zones, the Ikarians, the Okinawans, what are the other few? There's the Vilcabambans. Actually, that's not actually a Blue Zone, but there's the Nicoya Peninsula, there's the I'm not going to go into them all. You can always read the Blue Zones. This is a great book, but not science-based in the sense of it being really regimented and looking at the exact proportions of the calories in their diet and the foods they're eating. Sardinians of Italy, which was actually oddly one of the ones that had the highest meat consumption, and they had amazing longevity. But more specifically in Healthy at 100 by John Robbins, he really emphasized the plant foods and give very vague references without really critical numerical breakdowns of what they were eating. And he was quoting a lot of stuff from Dr. Alexander Leaf, who was a National Geographic explorer, sort of similar to the Blue Zones, which is funded by National Geographic as well, by Dan Buettner. And yeah, both of these people, Dan Buettner and Dr. Alexander Leaf from several decades ago, they're doing incredible work, and they had done incredible work. However, when it came to the diet, they were emphasizing things from the plant-based bias. And link number 14 below is a critique of Healthy at 100 by John Robbins by the Weston Price Institute. People have their bias about the Weston Price Institute as well, but I encourage you to read that just to get an idea of what they're saying about it, because they make it pretty clear that some of these groups that Dr. Alexander Leaf looked at were looked at by other researchers who found that, for example, the Hunzas ate tons of goat, dairy, eggs, and a lot less of the starchy foods that they said they were consuming, the beans and the grains. Obviously they had the access to fruit, but they didn't have all that much land to plant on, being in the mountains, so they actually utilize the goat and the other animal foods because it's more compact and needs less space, basically. One of the most talked about long-lived cultures is the Seventh-day Adventists. They do live a long time, and they have a number of good health lifestyle factors going for them, and that's the key point to think about, is that they are a religious group that has an extraordinarily tight community mindset, very religious, very pro-exercise, pro not drinking caffeine or alcohol, excessive alcohol, and all these other things that could potentially be harmful as well. Very low rates of smoking. And yet the studies on vegetarianism in the culture seems to get emphasized as if that's the one thing and only thing that's affecting their long life. So link number 15 below is an interview with an ex-Adventist who is involved in the medical side of things, and it really gets into sort of the false pushing of data. There's a lot of Adventists that got into government sort of research areas, and they pushed a lot of the studies on that were done in the Adventists and twisted the research, as is clear now. They really downplayed the fact that the Adventists that were actually living the longest were consuming the fish, not the pure vegan or vegetarian diet. And when compared to Mormons, who has in certain area groups, but were not as large, so they were not as significantly paid attention to, Mormons, who had very similar tenets with the exercise, natural living, etc. However, they never had much restriction on diet, so they were consuming the meat. They had the very similar outcomes for longevity, and this was not really talked about, kind of suppressed, and that's sort of the mindset around when you get religious mindset behind philosophy, when we're trying to push a scientific thing. It was a way of bringing more people in to the religion or Christianity in general, saying, well, the way we eat is the way that God told us to eat, and it is the healthiest, so why don't you start eating healthy, and you might think about coming to join us, or come join us and you can start eating healthy. That's really not the way that we want to be doing our science, because that's based in bias, and that's not really proper science. So you got to start forgetting about the Seventh-day Adventist research as being relevant to comparing vegetarianism versus omnivorism. Link number 16 is a review by the Western Press Foundation again on the Blue Zones book, and so you can read that if you want to also learn about the flaws in the book by Dan Buettner that was similar to John Robbins' book with similar conclusions and things. Good book to read. I really enjoyed it, and I got a lot from it, and it tells you a lot about lifestyle, how important community, love between individuals, exercise, all those things are. But the diet part is a little not as well researched, in my opinion, and it's clearly shown by this review. One of the areas of going back to Healthy at 100 by John Robbins, or actually the work of Dr. Alexander Leaf, he was looking at the Georgian region of Russia around the Caucasus Mountains, and he was saying again that it was a high carbohydrate diet, low meat consumption, a lot of raw foods, interestingly, that was responsible for their great health. However, another study found that it was in the rural communities where meat consumption was much higher that the longevity was better than in the more urban dwellings, which relied more on the grains and the more long-term storage foods. So their diet was rich in fatty meats, very high-fat dairy and kefir, and that's link number 17 below. It, again, is not a link, it's something from a book, and you can always search that online if you want to learn more about it. There's one more link, and it's number 18 below, the final link, and it is an article on how cholesterol across the board in very many studies. This is an article that has 30 or going on 34 links to scientific references. So let's not be biased in saying, oh, they don't have any scientific backing. They clearly do in their articles. You can read that if you want to read more about the effect that cholesterol has on longevity and how higher cholesterol actually improves longevity. Animal food rich diets, when they're naturally raised, pasture raised animal foods, wild foods, and lower in these sort of anti-nutrient type foods, the grains and beans, we actually see better longevity and health in virtually all scenarios. So with that, I'd love to hear your response. Post comments below, click the like button and favorite this video if you enjoyed it. Don't forget to subscribe above, and check out the other videos in the sort of table of contents section, of course. Check out those links below to learn more about all those references I was talking about. And with that, take care and embrace life without limits.